So, today we hear an interesting story from the Old Testament. We hear about King David at the beginning, the first reading, who is King Solomon's father. And this king, if we remember, was the one who, out of all the brothers, was the shortest and, the least expected one. And God, of course, chose that one to everybody's surprise. And so in this story, this is towards the end of David's kingship. And David has been really wanting to build this temple for God. And David and the other leaders, the Israelite leaders, have this idea. We want to build this special place for God. But it never manages to happen under King David's rule because the whole time he's there, other enemy armies keep attacking. And so he has to keep defending Israel. So he's too busy with that and never has a chance. But eventually, the kingship passes to his son Solomon. And Solomon is able to do that. So we hear during the story today, we kind of fast forward through the whole details of how they actually build this temple. But we get to the end of the building, fast forward, and all of a sudden we are at the temple dedication ceremony. And this is where it's finished and they're ready to, start using it as a temple. And so there's this whole elaborate ceremony and all the priests are there and they invite everybody from Israel, all the leaders, and they want to dedicate this temple to God. And the interesting thing is God shows up as smoke, and so the Israelite leaders can't even do their normal ministering like they're expecting to do. So that's just a surprise. And then another thing that for me was even more surprising, maybe perhaps the most surprising thing is Solomon says that God has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. And that's an interesting image of darkness. In my mind, it reminds me of the image of God leading the Israelites through the wilderness by day and by night as a pillar of smoke during the day and a fire at night to guide them along the way as they were fleeing Egypt on their way to the Red Sea. So that's one image that it conjures up in my mind that has to do with smoke and darkness. But it's surprising, we, at least in my mind, and, I think we sometimes, if we're not careful, we can kind of subconsciously think about darkness in a negative way. And I've sort of had to learn as somebody who is white that can, it sometimes cause unconscious, racist bias for me. So that's something I'm working on learning, and I invite us all to be aware of and be mindful. But I think this image of darkness is fascinating because I think there's two ways you can look at darkness. Darkness can be associated with death, which this time of year we're getting close to Halloween, we're getting close to All Saints, All Souls Day, and so that's certainly a theme that's on our minds as we think of all the ones who we've loved, who we've lost. But another theme, I think, related to darkness is fertility, because darkness can be the darkness of the womb, or darkness can be the darkness of fertile soil. And I was thinking about that. There's a beautiful example of the new life that the fertility of fertile soil can bring right here at Creator with Ali, with his whole project with traditional African crops that he and his organization are using to feed African folks here. So there can be this really beautiful sense of new life that's associated with this image of darkness too. But it's not what you expect when you think of darkness. And that's a theme that I really kind of found in this reading, is the idea of God being a God of surprises, God acting in ways that we don't expect. And certainly the characters in this story were surprised by how God acted. King David wanted to build this temple and he was never able to, so he was kind of disappointed and surprised about that. But in my experience, the ways that God works, even though they're surprising, somehow it works out better than we planned or better than we would have expected when it goes God's way, when we allow God to work the way God wants to, rather than trying to control how is this going to go. We have an idea in mind and we try to kind of force a certain way, a certain outcome. In my experience, that does not go well. But when we trust God, when we allow God to do do things God's way, even if we don't understand it, even if it seems mysterious, even if it downright seems crazy, it doesn't make sense, somehow God seems to bring new life out of that, and it seems to work out better. One example I have from my life of that is my first call. So Marie and I were in Eugene for my internship, 2017 to 2018. And then there's this thing in the LCA where you look for your first call, your first job as a pastor, where you're entered into what's called the draft. And so your name goes into a list of names, and all the bishops get together around the country and sort of assign out which names go where. So my name is assigned to the Lower Susquehanna Synod of Pennsylvania. And Marie and I both had this sort of gut feeling of like, that really doesn't feel like where we're being called. And so we talked with the synod, and we asked their special permission, hey, can we please look elsewhere? And they said, okay. So in the meantime, while I was trying to find a call, we had moved from Eugene up to Portland, and I was working at the New Seasons, just actually down the road here. And Marie was working at the Portland Waldorf School in Milwaukee. And I was in conversation with a whole bunch of different synods, which are our geographic regions, about where to go. But one thing that Marie and I thought we were sure about was that I should be doing urban ministry. Well, careful when you tell God what you're sure about. So we were having different conversations, mostly with folks on the West Coast, but it was really a whirlwind. There was, Grand Canyon Synod, different Washington synods, Oregon, a couple California synods, all over the map. But eventually, so time went by. So we ended up being in Portland almost 2 years when all was said and done. And so that was 2018, fall of 2018 through, then we were still in Portland and hadn't found a call, and then COVID hit, 2020. And so we were living closer to downtown in West Mount Tabor, and we were honestly starting to get kind of sick of city life. Maybe that was God working in our lives, sort of starting to kind of get us ready that maybe there's something else for us, because, parking was an issue, and, we all remember the lines at the grocery stores, and, it was an odd summer, that there was, the anger around the, unjust murder of George Floyd, right, righteous anger, but also things getting out of control too. So just, for a variety of reasons, kind of feeling sick of the city. Well, lo and behold, I get a call from Diane, who worked in the synod in Northwest Washington, about a call at a Latino ministry that was up in rural agricultural Burlington, Washington. Oh, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind, but I do speak Spanish, and, as we thought about it, we realized, we need something new. Something's got to change, because we weren't really on the right track. So, and, initially it was possibly going to be part-time, which wasn't ideal, but then we had a housing opportunity come through, and so we said, you know what, let's just do this. And so we said yes, and then more funding came through, so eventually I was able to have a full-time call. So God really provided, and it was a really meaningful call, and we were there over 3 years, 3.25 years or so. Really grateful I took it, but it was not what we thought we expected. We had this idea, like, okay, God, this is what's going to happen, and I could just sort of picture God sitting up there kind of smiling and laughing, and we're like, oh, you're going to tell me how it's going to go, huh? It seems to me that's how God is, We're going to build you with this temple, God, and you're just going to live there, and you're only going to be there, and that's where you are. And God probably looks at the Israelites and kind of laughs and says, oh, that's the only place I'm going to be. We'll see how that goes for you, And of course, unfortunately, eventually the temple was taken down by an enemy army, and Israelites went into captivity in Babylon, but eventually they were able to come back, and God did not abandon them. God was with them the whole time, and things did not go how they expected, but new life was able to come out of that, and there was growth, there were new opportunities that came, even when things didn't go how the Israelites had expected. So I think the invitation for us, a creator in our lives, individually and as a community, is the same thing, to trust God, to trust that God works in mysterious ways, and we don't always understand it, and, sometimes we kind of disagree. We're like, no, God, that doesn't seem like a good idea, but you know what? My experience is when we just go with it, when we trust and really try to listen, things work out. God has a way of providing that's truly miraculous and mysterious, and We don't understand it, and we don't need to. God's the one that understands it. But God might come in smoke. God might come in thick darkness. God might come, working through a different person to build a temple than we thought it was going to be. God might have a different call in mind for us than we thought we were going to have. But God has a way of using those experiences to bring new life. God came to this world through the death of God's own Son. God, saved us. God gave us this whole gift of new life through the one thing that all the disciples were terrified might happen. Don't let them kill Jesus. That's what happened, but that wasn't the end of the story. Jesus was resurrected, and we know as Christians that's the good news that we preach, is that death does not have the final word, that new life and love have the final word, that even when things look really ugly, there's a plan, and God has a way to work miracles and work new life out of death. That's the Christian promise, and that's our hope, and that's what we profess, and that's what we believe, and that's what gives me hope. And so I think that's God's invitation for us, is to trust that hope, to trust the new life that God brings, even when it seems crazy, even when it doesn't make sense, to really listen and when we hear God's voice speaking, encouraging us to move a certain direction, to listen to that and to follow that. So may we listen to that voice and trust this mystery of God, that God's kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.